Dr. Hart joins us on the Braincare Podcast once again to discuss his research on drugs. Now, he is a professor of neuroscience and psychology at Columbia University, and in the last episode, we discussed the impact that illegal, well-known drugs have on our brains, and this episode, we're actually going to discuss the impact that the limits upon our freedom as a consequence have on the experience itself, and how such limitations also affect our brains too. So, Carl, thank you so much for coming back. Let's get straight to it. Drugs are bad, is the general statement in society. You beg to differ from scientific reasoning. Can you summarize your findings that prove this thought completely wrong?
Yeah, the thing that I like people to understand is that drugs are not good or bad. They're just inert substances waiting for a biological system to interact with. So the effect is largely dependent upon the environment and the individual. And so to say, it's like saying cars are bad, cars are evil. That would be stupid. But we do that with drugs, which is stupid. And so when we think about drugs and the effects that they have on people, we're talking about cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, these types of drugs, marijuana, largely they're used as tools, and people use them oftentimes effectively to feel better, to increase social interactions, to be more empathetic, to increase energy, a wide range of things. Now, it's true, there's a potential for like negative effects. For example, people worry about toxicity, neurotoxicity, drugs causing brain cell death. That certainly has been shown with the amphetamines, especially at large doses given to non-tolerant animals. But those doses are 10, 20, 40 times what humans take. And in non-tolerant animals. When you make the animal tolerant, you don't see those toxic effects. And humans don't typically take doses that are so large that they're going to be toxic, because those humans are not around to tell us about it anymore. That just doesn't happen. And so our focus on like these animal results that are not relevant, that do not translate to the human condition, is, it's interesting to know that, of course, but when you try to extrapolate it to the human condition, that's irresponsible. Because now you are unnecessarily frightening the population about an effect that won't happen. The bottom line is that humans know that the effects of drugs, they can harness the effects of drugs to get the beneficial effects. Just like they can harness the beneficial effects of driving an automobile to get the necessary effects, to get the desired effects. The same is true with drugs.
I completely agree. The war on drugs has been a colossal failure. I think that's completely true. Whilst we're not really here to talk politics on the Braincare podcast, it is all about understanding how to make our brains better. But whilst we explored what happens in our brains with certain drugs last time, can we talk about what happens to our brains as a consequence of this fear, shame, guilt, and criminal aspect to hiding the use of drugs? Like, have you ever been able to study, whether the experience whilst on those drugs is negatively impacted by all of these extra emotions that one's feeling because of the system?
There's no real work addressing that issue that you just said, but that's an important one. Obviously, it's like one of the most important ones. There's no real work addressing that issue because it doesn't really fit into our desired sort of political position, or our political position. That is, drugs are bad. That's it. It's not the fact that you are causing people to be paranoid, suspicious, to engage in panic behavior that oftentimes is far worse than the drug effects themselves. Now, so people haven't studied that, but you can imagine. We all can imagine how paranoid we get when we think we're about to get caught doing something we're not supposed to, and if you're risking going to jail, you can really imagine how paranoid someone would get, and that sort of suspicion, paranoia, decreases our sort of trust of other individuals. It causes these weird interactions with people, and that's not good for any society. But I just want to say that the war on drugs has not been a failure, because that would be a mistake to say that. The war on drugs has been a tremendous success. for a small group of individuals, and that's why it continues. Politicians, the war on drugs is a wet dream. Because politicians, all they have to say is we're going to get drugs off the streets, hire more police. Those results are fast. You can get people arrested easily, and you can show your confiscation of some amounts of drugs. Look like you're making progress. That's so cheap. But politicians, they benefit. Folks who are hired in law enforcement, they benefit. The prison industry benefits. The people who do drug treatment benefit. All of these folks who do urine testing, they benefit. It's us, the society, that's suffering. But for those other individuals, they're making out like bandits.
I mean, what about freedom? So you talk a lot about how responsible adults should be allowed to be responsible adults. And I think it's really important because it has barely come up in our conversation. You know, your book is about responsible adult drug use, not just drug use for anyone. So I'd love to know what like the neuroscientific impact of being forced to or told how to behave as an adult who has evidence to the contrary, especially of what the law is telling you, how that might be seen as a larger cause for concern of our brains ultimately, that sort of restriction when there isn't the scientific reasoning behind it.
I think our focus with drugs and brains has actually helped get us in this mess when we can just simply look at people's behavior. How are people feeling? What are they doing? And so we don't have to have the sophisticated sort of focus on the brain. In fact, the brain imaging sort of studies have been used to manipulate us. So we say, this part of the brain lights up in non-drug users, whereas in drug users, it doesn't light up. And then you say, what does that mean? So, well, both of them are normal. They're in the normal range. But the person who's presenting this is manipulating the public because the public doesn't know which questions to ask. And so it's important that people just simply look at people's behavior. It's like you're an adult, and now you don't have the right to make a decision. You pay your taxes, you pay your bills, you contribute to your community. Well, you're not free if you can't make your own decisions. And some people, they don't want freedom because freedom comes with responsibility. And that responsibility is like, okay, if you're going to use MDMA or whatever drug, you still have to take care of your family. You still have to do these sorts of things. And people say, well, some people say, well, I can't handle it. That's fine if you can't handle it, but because you can't handle it does not give you the right to say that no one else can handle it or no one else has that choice. And that's what we have kind of tacitly agreed to in our societies.
And I think this is the thing that you really uncover in your book, which is if you were an irresponsible adult before taking drugs, you're an irresponsible adult after taking drugs. And if you were responsible before taking drugs, you're probably still responsible after taking them in most cases, right? So it's the same thing with a car. You get in the car irresponsible, you're going to drive it irresponsibly. It's a great analogy, by the way, because I hadn't really thought about it in that sense, but it's spot on.
Absolutely. And you know, we see some people in our societies who are suffering, and they may have unstable housing, they may be unemployed, and they may also use drugs. And one of the things that society has done, including the progressives, especially the progressives, they say, well, you know, like these people, you see the results of drugs. That's not the results of drugs. In many cases, it's the results of people having co-occurring psychiatric problems, people having all of these other problems that we should help with. But we attribute it to drugs because it's an easy scapegoat. Never mind the person has no housing. Never mind the person has limited education. Never mind the person has caught hell for much of their life, which we should help with. But we shouldn't be blaming drugs for that. And so when we pat ourselves on the back when we have supervised consumption facilities, and then we're like, hey, you see this? And that's not that person's primary problem. If they have to go to a public space to inject or use drugs, their primary problem is that they don't have housing. Why not give them housing? And so that's where the focus should be. And we get it twisted all the time in our societies.
As this is the Braincare podcast, I'd love to finish off the episode by understanding how you take care of your own brain in your own life. And with pleasure, obviously, include your own drug use as part of that, because this is going to be the most unique answer I expect us to get.
Well, I don't know if it's unique because I do the basics. The most important thing I tell people is sleep. Make sure you get 8 or more hours of sleep every night. If you can't, try and make up when you can. Sleeping well, you gotta sleep because if you sleep, that will take care of so many problems if you sleep well. Eat well. You have to make sure that you eat nutritiously. Like, for example, if you eat, if you use opioids, really have to be cognizant of the fact that you may get constipated. So increase the amount of fiber in your diet. If you're not doing that, that's going to be problems for the brain and everything else. And stimulants, if you're using stimulants, they will decrease your food intake, and eating well is so important. So make sure that you're tending to your calories, the nutrition that you're taking in. Make sure you are getting sufficient amounts of water. I drink 64 ounces of water every day. I have my green smoothies every day. My diet is filled with beans and nuts and that sort of thing. And I exercise. I try and exercise at least 4 or 5 times a week to make sure that I'm healthy. And all of this also increase the likelihood that my drug effects will be great. And then because I won't be tired, I'll be well rested, I'll be nutritiously in shape. So all of these sorts of things I do to try and take care of myself.
If you are going to explore the responsible side for responsible adults of taking drugs, then ultimately it all comes down to knowing your facts, having enough sleep, eating well, and staying hydrated for the optimal life experience, and therefore you'll be looking after your brain, whatever happens.
Absolutely, man. And also, if you can, please seek out people who look good, look like they're taking care of themselves and so forth, and they're doing this activity too, because they might have some clues, some secrets that can help you as well. And that's one of the sort of negative impact of our sort of current regulating of these drugs, or restricting these drugs, or banning these drugs, that we can't seek out people who are doing it well.
Yeah, I mean, just on that point, I remember in your book, talking about how many people on your travels you've met who are the unsuspecting, so to speak, but totally suspecting, your normal middle-class people across cultures and societies all over the world who are doing it, but doing it in shame and fear and hiding.
That's right. That's the thing that really concerns me, is that people who are doing it in shame and fear, and they have been vilified. That's what I feel, that makes me feel awful. And then there are a lot of sort of middle-class privileged people who don't come to the defense of these people, and they're doing the same thing, and they are cowards. And that really, that disturbs me more than anything. People can come out and in defense of those people in a variety of ways. You don't necessarily have to come out in this public way. Come out to your friends, your social circle, your family. But we have to change this. We really have to change it, because these folks who are identified as drug users, they oftentimes are just seeking to feel good. And who's not for that? Who can be against people feeling good?
It's a beautiful way to end. Dr. Carl Hart, where can people find you? And obviously, where can they go and find your book? I mean, the answer to that is usually Amazon, but you might have a better place.
You can always hit me up at Twitter. You can catch me on Twitter, Dr. Carl Hart. That's it, at Dr. Carl Hart. That's Dr. Carl Hart. And that same address, drcarlhart.com, you can go to my website. And I promise you, I will get to you eventually.
Eventually, yeah.
And trust that I'm not ignoring people. It's just that I'm overwhelmed, because when you come out of the closet about this thing, like I've done, there are a number of stupid comments that I have to address. And there are, so they get mixed in with the legitimate concerns and legitimate questions, and so I apologize up front.
Very, very good disclaimer. And like this conversation, all good things come to those who wait. So a little bit of patience goes a long way. So on that note, please do go and buy from your local bookstore Drug Use for Grown-Ups. It's a brilliant read. And thank you so much for your time, Dr. Carl Hart.
Thank you for having me, Dan. I really appreciate it.